Alright, I'm back for our tier list. This time I'm going to be reviewing the drafted bindings you can basically pick up in the game. Now in total there's basically 18 aspects you basically pick up, and they range from being supportive to mobility inducing, and then other services direct damage to enemies. So let's cover them. The first on the list is going to be After Image. So After Image basically gives an ally one stack of blur, and they basically gain a critical charge on a random binding. It also has ascensions that basically gives them 4 stack of blur, and then if they basically get hit but don't take any damage, they basically gain 20 armor damage until binding is used. So they get pretty strong that way. There's Phasing Image, which basically grants them 2 stacks of blur and 2 critical charges on 2 random bindings, plus a little bit of movement. And then Shadow Image, which basically grants them critical charge on all bindings, which would be excellent on characters that basically aren't building any sort of critical chance, or have any other way of basically getting it. So After Image has some fairly interesting perks here. You have a fairly standard gain a little bit of movement. You can get something called Precise, which basically gives you crit damage, and then on crit you basically lose all stacks. You got Quicken Image, which basically gives you lower base cooldown. So the thing about After Image is basically all about reducing cooldowns and getting critical charge, and getting blur. So initial ramming, billion gains critical charge. That makes it cheaper. This makes it a random binding gets cheaper cost, and the Mirror Image basically grants 50 armor damage at a turn. This is good if you basically want to be able to get a little damage buff out of it as well. So After Image. Overall, I consider After Image to be a fairly tactical thing if you basically can make use of it. It's not necessarily always going to be beneficial to you, but if basically you're going to be a blurry type of character, or just Mosscloak in general, I guess this would be alright. It's a little bit niche though as a thing, and that's the only thing I sort of dislike about it, is it's too niche. And it makes it sound like it's a little bit mediocre. You can use it, but I mean, there's better stuff I could probably use it right over as a thing. Alright, let's go look for Blink. So, Blink. This lets you teleport a far distance away, and on turn start you get a full cost discount. Now, I really like Blink, especially if I get Warp, which is basically over here. This lets you basically swap with your allies or an enemy, and basically switch places with them. And that can be very beneficial for moving enemies basically into better more opportune spots to be hit. Basically to get a little shield in your ally yourself, to get your ally basically out of harm's way if move into a bad position, etc. There's also Flash, but it's basically keep casting Blink as you defeat enemies. This can be really useful if you have Mark or other benefits basically on your Blink. And then there's Blast, which basically just do some damage to stuff. I really don't think much of Blast, but it's there, I guess, if you want more damage, I guess. So Blink. Again, you got movement, and you got Distant Blink, basically lets you blink wherever you want to. And Quicken Blink basically lets you use it more. Now, what I really like about Blink is that it basically has a lot of nice stuff like Shielding Blink, Quickening Blink to basically reduce your highest cooldown by 1. Marking, which basically lets you get extra damage if you're basically building that way. You get Discount, which basically makes them random buying cheaper. that can be really useful because, like, on turn start, this is basically always like cost 0, so this can actually reduce their cost of another talent. Extracting gives you an orb. That's just stupidly powerful. And then blurring blink gives you blur, which is, it's alright. It's there. I consider blink to be like, one of these talents that, like, I really don't mind basically picking up. And, if I'm basically on the character that basically requires some sort of mobility, it's not bad to basically pick it up for that reason. So, fantastic little skill. Alright, Cleave. So Cleave is basically our first, like, sort of like damage inflicting type of, like, binding here. And it's actually pretty powerful. It inflicts 200 damage in Moderate Cone, and also inflicts like 5 stacks of bleed. Now, I consider bleed to be kind of weak in this game. Like, you do get like some like good damage basically out of it if you basically stack up high enough and like sort of like build toward it. But I find compared to like burning or like fire, or, like freezing, poison, stuff like that, it's a little bit weak. I mean, I can certainly get some good stuff out of it, but I mean, you have to be very careful of that. We have like, if this right here, this basically turns it into like a single damaging type of attack, where you basically hit like, the same enemy for like 3 200 damage like bursts each. That can be really great against like bosses, where you basically just want to burn them down real fast. We've got Serrated Sweep. This basically turns into like, a circular attack. So basically you're inflicting like, 125 damage in a huge area, inflicting a whole lot of bleed. Not bad if you're basically building for like a bleed type of character, basically make everything bleed to death. So, not bad. And then there's Hemorrhage. This does a little bit less bleed than like, Serrated Sweep, but it basically keeps the Moderate Cone type of ability. You basically have like your regular Clave. It gives you like 10 stacks of bleed, so that's double, and then Hemorrhage. Hemorrhage is nice because when you're basically hit with like, bleed damage again, you basically lose the Hemorrhage and then basically like inflict all the bleed damage all at once. So if you're basically inflicting like, bleed damage a lot, this can be like pretty useful. Much like before, we have like base cleave, additional stacks. That's basically like something that's going to be like, fairly prevalent for like all these like, stats affecting type of like attacks. Shielding cleave gives you like free shield. That's not bad, but when you consider the fact this has like a 5-turn cooldown, it's like, not that much really. You got breaking cleave, it gives you shatter. Bolster cleave, more damage. Ratio sharp cleave, more bleed. Bloodthirsty Cleave, on hitting enemies, restore 1 HP per enemy hit. That can be really nice if there's basically lots of enemies on the field. You basically heal up yourself. Discount Cleave basically makes it a little bit cheaper, which is, useful because it basically costs 2 to basically cast this. And then Running Claws basically just gives you bleeding damage. In many ways, I consider like Cleave to be like one of these like, abilities that I basically pick up if I basically want like more damage. So I wouldn't really pick it up if like, I'm really lacking in damage, but I mean, if I basically want to like, inflict more damage, then like this can basically do it. I won't say there's like a lot of like, classes that really benefit from it though, and that's like the only thing about it. It's laudable, but it's not excellent because the thing is like, it's not like a must pick up like on all your characters for like, the extra damage. And it doesn't really like, bleed damage is not that great, so it's laudable, but it's not like the best thing. Alright, Cone of Frost is next. So Cone of Frost basically deals 70 damage in a large cone and inflicts like 5 stacks of Frostbite. Frostbite basically like, when basically, you basically hit an enemy with Frostbite to basically take additional like, damage. Cone of Frost basically has ascensions that like, expand it into like a huge area around you, much like, Serrated Sweep. So you basically hit like, all enemies around you in a bigger sweep, so you do a little bit more damage with that. You inflict more stacks of like, Frostbite. If you're basically trying to like maximize your damage, it's pretty good for it. There's Frigid Gust. This basically inflicts like, 9 stacks of Frostbite in a large cone. I consider this a little bit better than Blizzard because unless like you're surrounded by stuff, you're usually going to be able to get like, Frigid Gust bites you off and like hit stuff easily with it. And then there's Slash Freeze. This basically does a small amount of damage, but I mean, you basically daze an enemy in like, that can be useful for as a defensive purpose. If you don't have like the ability to daze stuff, that's like, you know, that's where it basically pops in. And if you're basically like going for, let's say, like cleave, for example, this would be like where, like, you know, you still get like a nice big burst of damage from it. You got Frigid Frost, more Frostbite, Quicken Frost, you know, standard base cooldown stuff. Water Frost, bigger effect. There's Hexing Frost, that basically lets you inflict Hex, so if you need something to basically Hex with, then this can do it. Mighty Frost does more damage. Prepare Frost, you know, cost cooldown. We got Freezing Frost from our Frostbite damage. Running Frost, which basically gives you an attack binding increase to enemies inflicted with, like, Frostbite. I'm not sure if it basically only affects, like, you know, Cone of Frost itself, but it's still like a lot of damage you basically build up for damage. And then Glacier Frost lets you get more Frostbite. Now, I'll note that in game, there's like only like a few classes that like you really benefit from like building more Frostbite. That being like, say, the Weaver or the Obelisk or the Star Captain. But they can do it quite well. And like, you know, it's like to the point that like, you know, it's not a bad skill if like that's what you're basically going for. So again, I would call it like, you know, laudable. It's like not the best thing ever, but I mean, it does its job like easily enough. I'm almost tempted to say this is excellent, actually, because the thing about, like, you know, Cone of Frost is that, like, you know, it's not just limited to those, like, classes either. I can make it work on, like, you know, other classes, too. So, you know, it's excellent. That's what I'll say about it. All right, Cultivate. Now, I'll note that I think Cultivate's kind of a weak ability to get. It has its purpose, basically, in the game where you can basically, like, you know, stock up stuff, but normally you don't really need to stock up, like, you know, wool on the ground and, like, you know, other benefits like this. So it's like a little bit niche, to say the least. It has some interesting stuff like, you know, mushroom growth that basically lets you get, like, you know, all your damage to basically go for a big burst. You got Flower Bloom. This basically creates, like, you know, additional will. So you can have like a massive like spurt of, like, you know, damage to basically like plant a bunch of these. There's Crop Harvest that basically restores your like HP and shield. So that can be really good for like replenishing yourself if you basically, you know, are in harm's way. You got like Pickup, basically getting some shield. That can be kind of useful in like a niche like sort of like ability where you might need some shield and it's basically what you get. So you can basically stockpile it. Cultivate Vitality lets you pick up like, you know, HP. And of course, like, you know, movement, that's always a thing. That's Blur. That can be useful if like you're for a friend's building with like after amateur gas if you have them in your party. Base cooldown, that's just useful because it does have a long cooldown. Critical cultivation basically picks up like, you know, critical like, you know, charge. Cultivate will is pretty nice because basically as you get like increased will, so if you basically plant like the flower, immediately pick it up, you can basically get like a will rate back. So, you know, if like, you know, you basically have nothing better to do, and this is not bad to get for it. Cultivate Strength lets you like, you know, get cost discount on like, you know, your Fistful Binding. And then Cultivate Post is basically reverse from magic. Like, the thing about like, you know, Cultivate, I don't think it's very good basically in like a sort of like single game sort of sense, but it can be very useful in like a multiplayer type of sense, or where basically like, you know, you're basically going for like a long game type of thing. And you have the time to plant them. So how do I basically rate this? I would say it's laudable, like the like, you know, Cultivate. Where it basically shines is like, you know, when you basically have like, you know, a party, that can be very useful for like, you know, benefiting your party, or if like, you know, you just have nothing better to do, it can be sort of useful for yourself to sort of stockpile stuff for like, you know, a rainy turn, so to speak. It's laudable. It's not like, you know, anything special, but it's laudable. All right, Discharge. That is right at the end here. So basically target an enemy to convert all kinetic charge to deal damage, or you grant an ally barrier. Discharge has a few interesting abilities. So you got like the Ascension here. This basically like, you know, lets you get double the kinetic charge, so you basically get more barrier and shield. Energize basically lets you like, you know, grant an ally omni damage until the end of the turn. That can be useful in like a pinch to basically give him a little bit extra damage. And then Circus lets you like, you know, deal double damage in the area around you. So if you want to be like a more hostile type of character, you can use it for a purpose. Now, I won't like lie here. I think Discharge is kind of weak, just to, in like, just to say at least here about it. But Propulsive Charge, basically Kinetic Charge, grants like 1 movement per turn per stack. I mean, that could be sort of useful, I guess. Charging Discharge, basically on turn start, you gain like Kinetic Charge. Quicken Discharge basically makes it a little cheaper to use because again, it's got a little bit of cooldown. Now, Shocking Discharge isn't bad. When you basically inflict shocked, or like get like an additional barrier, that can be kind of useful because like you can basically like get like extra shield, or like the shock is basically good, basically like sort of like something to help out a little bit. Maneuver Discharge basically usually a teleport binding grants you like Kinetic Charge. So if you like a teleporting character, like say like the Chainbreaker, can basically get some good like mileage out of it, I guess we'll say. Moss perhaps. That's basically like cheaper to use. Conserving Discharge basically lets you like conserve your like Kinetic Charge, so basically it's lost per turn, so this lets you keep a little bit. Shielding basically triggers at -5 stacks. This gives you, if you have like if you have an ally and you're basically blocking Kinetic Charge, basically like shielding a little bit better. Recycling Discharge, after conversion, regain half of Kinetic Charge converted. So basically once you use it, you basically just like you retain half of it, I guess. The thing about like Discharge is that I don't really find like the damage is really great from its like basic ability, and it can be useful to sort of like shield up a friend and stuff like that. But instead of like shielding up a friend, I'd rather just like inflict like damage, so like get the like, thing like basically dead, or have something like say like smoke bomb, it to be like daze it and like reduce the damage that way at least, and get their attention on me as well. Discharge is one of those abilities that like it could be good, but it feels deficient because you need to basically upgrade in order for it to really be good, and until then it's just like sort of there, so it's not great. Okay, Grasp. Where's Grasp? It's right there on page 5. Good to know. So I looked at my friend really loves to use Grasp when I basically play with him. The thing about this is it basically inflicts the mark status, and if you have like a character that basically inflicts a lot of mark, then this can be really, really good to sort of like maximize it a little bit more. Envelop basically lets you like do wide cones, basically like mark a whole lot of people, pull them towards you. That's the other thing about like this, by the way. It basically pulls enemies towards you, so basically you can pull into more opportune areas. Harpoon lets you damage a single enemy, pulling them towards you. Bit like increased damage. Lure lets you like damage a single enemy, pull them towards you, inflict vulnerable. So you basically like make them a lot more easier to basically go down. Grasp is nice, by the way. I definitely like its like Ascension is a lot more like it, but it can be really good, best by itself. Distant Grasp is like your standard like increased range. Sapping Grasp basically inflicts sap. That can be useful if you're basically able to kill stuff with like your Grasp, but you may not, so who knows. Quicken Grasp base cooldown. Marking Grasp, you can inflict like additional mark. Daze is daze. Prepared is prepared. More damage, more critical. Extracting is nice for like the extra orb. The nice thing about like Grasp is that it's basically a very like utility sort of grab type of thing, and like you basically inflict a daze and like do like extra damage if you want, get like extra mark. It does its thing, and like I can basically appreciate it because like my friend has like used it sort of as a good effect to like sort of help himself out, or like pull stuff basically into like a better position for it. I consider it like an excellent ability, but it's basically to like use it for what it's basically used for, basically tactical purposes, and like getting a little bit like extra damage. So it's good. All right, Incendiary. Now, from the get-go, I don't really find like Incendiary has a lot of use for myself in these games. There's not a lot of characters besides the Magnemire basically like really like relies on this thing. So, it's like sort of like lacking a little bit of all that. You can get some like interesting stuff here, like Wildfire. So basically inflict 3 stacks. If your enemy dies at the end of your turn, half its stacks of burn are spread to all remaining enemies. So it's basically like a lot of like if you're basically like inflicting a lot of fire to like one character, you basically like kill that enemy with like your burn, and like it'll be basically just like spread to everyone else. You got Incinerate. This inflicts like, 20 stacks of burn and enters burn. So if you basically want to like, make something like really burn, then that can be pretty good for it. Flash Fire basically lets you like, deal damage to a single enemy. And you can basically double the stacks of burn. This is really useful if you basically want to build like, lots of like, fire on like a single target. Because like you get 15 stacks, but you basically double it. So, they're all very useful, interesting, I guess, like, if you're basically going that route for, like, fire. Additional fire, base cooldown, critical related sort of, like, ability here. You got increased damage from the, skill itself, cost discount. Firestar basically lets you, like, inflict, like, burn. And, like, if your enemy's not inflicted with burn, inflict, like, 10 stacks, otherwise inflict 5 stacks. You got Blazing Incendiary, basically inflicting additional 15 stacks. Combusting Incendiary, more burn damage. Shielding Incendiary, much like the Frost, basically lets you deal more damage to the enemies that are burning. When it comes to Incinerate, the thing is, like, unlike with, say, like Cone of Frost or, like Cleave here, I find it's very mediocre because there's not, like, a lot of use for it in my games, I find. Because I don't really need it for the ability itself. I just need it for, like, combined with, say, like the Magnemire, which makes it, like, a little bit, like, sort of niche to sort of use. And, that needs sort of like, regulates it, like, to like being like, this wide bar of it, I guess we'll say. All right, what's the next one there? I didn't actually pay attention. Invigorate. Okay, I do like Invigorate quite a bit. Page 3. So, Invigorate is basically sort of like, a self-induced buff that can be like, turned into like an ally buffing type of thing. If you get like Call to Arms here. So what this basically does is your next attack bind basically gains double damage. That's like, okay-ish if like, you have something very good. But where it just like really shines is like, we could Call to Arms, Battle Cry, or Adrenaline Rush. Adrenaline Rush basically lets your next attack bind deal triple damage. So if you have like a really big spiking type of ability, then this would be really useful for it. Call to Arms can basically double the attack damage for like your ally or yourself. So, it's pretty nice. Basically, if like your friend's gonna be like doing a lot of damage, you basically buff them up. Or if you're basically gonna go for like, a turn where you basically do a lot of damage, and this can be a thing too. It doesn't really stack by the way, but I mean, it can still be quite powerful. So, it's good. And then Battle Cry basically lets you gain like, 50 armor damage for the rest of combat. This is good if you basically want to stack it because like, you can basically just keep like using this over and over again to sort of like, up your damage by a lot. So, Invigorate. You have base cooldown. Reduce the cooldown of our buying by like 1. That's pretty nice. Swiftly Invigorate, 25 movement. Restoration, like always nice to heal, doesn't matter what it is. Critical Charge, always good. Bolster Invigorate, being 20 army damage loss on end of turn. Bolster Invigorate can be okay if like, you have like a good burst type of thing, but whatever. Resistant is like, damage this, that's always nice. Hastening reduces the cooldown of your other binds by 1. So instead of it being like, reduce the cooldown of another ram bind by 1, this basically reduce all your other binds by 1. So, if you're on like, say like an obelisk, this can be really useful for that. And discounting, of course, this makes this like you to use like, other stuff more, which would be very nice as well in the right circumstances. In many ways, I consider Invigorate to be like, a top tier talent. Like, it's basically like up there with like Blink. Like when I basically see Invigorate, I'm not like, I'm almost considering is it worth like, sort of pick it up because it benefits everyone. And, you basically get like such good boons out of it, even if you don't really focus on it that much. All right, Invocation, that is right there at the end. So Invocation was basically like, a talent I basically used when I basically like, played the game last. So I have like a lot of like appreciation for it. It basically gives you Divine Touch, basically lets you like, smite enemies, basically hit. And you can basically grant to yourself or an ally. It comes in Ascension's Benediction, Storm Blessed, and Judgment. Benediction is great if you basically lack like the ability to sort of like, heal or to like grant shields. And this would be useful in like an ally or yourself to basically like, get a little bit out of it. Storm Blessed basically gives like, your ability to sort of like, hit like every enemy on the field with it, or to yourself or an ally, which would be very useful. And then there's Judgment. Basically, like you gaze on an enemy, and anything that basically like hits that enemy, it's just going to trigger like a smite on it, so to speak. So basically, like I'm being hit, smite this enemy, lost an end of turn. So on a boss, this would be like this like completely destructive, so to speak, because you basically like hit the boss with smite after smite after smite. Especially if there's like other people in your game, like they also trigger to it as well, right? So there's that too. You got quick in, so like faster base cooldown, because again these are, well, this actually isn't that bad, but it's really useful in this guy. Swift invocation, basically get like extra movement on smiting, so when you basically hit, you basically get a little bit of movement. A little bit different, but it mixes it up a little bit. Potent invocation, grant 1 additional stack of Divine Touch, so 5 as opposed to 4. It's there. Prepared invocation on turn start, full count, cost discount. You actually use this quite a bit, so this is actually not really bad in this one. Divine Touch inflicts hex on smiting. Not bad if like you're able to like get the Storm Blessed, or if you're basically able to like hit first. Chain invocation basically smites additional time on hitting, so double smite, and then more smite damage. So I really do like invocation quite a bit. It's not like useful for all the characters, but I mean, if like you're going for like a sort of smiting type of build, it can be very useful. What I consider excellent. The thing about like invocation is that it is very useful, but unless your character is basically like building towards smiting, it's like not as useful. It's just like it's just sort of there if like you just like don't really focus on it. So it is good. Like these like talents up here, grasping like these ones up here. And I'm actually move this down a little bit. Move this up. The thing about like invocation is that it is very useful to sort of like get like off a lot of like help basically to like your friends if basically like, you're building for smite damage. But that's the thing, you actually have to focus on smite damage for it to be useful. And you know what, we're gonna move right back up to Cone of Frost. Cone of Frost is basically one of those abilities that like it's sort of jump between like A and B for me. But the thing about invocation here, invocation, the thing about it that like sort of hurts is the fact that you have to sort of build like your magic damage, and you have to build like your smite like set. And the other abilities like up here, like these all like sort of like you can sort of get away with like how can I put this? With like these abilities up here, they're just like useful to everyone. This is tactical, so it can be used like by everyone to sort of benefit like your friends or yourself. Cone of Frost is sort of a similar way because you can like basically sort of cast it and like get some good effects from it. I'm actually really tempted to just like move this down here actually. The thing about like Cone of Frost is that it's sort of like cleave, but cleave is basically up for just damage. This thing is like it could be good. It only costs like 1, so that's the thing as well. This thing like it gets some like really good damage as opposed to like cleave, which basically like has much less. Cleave basically costs 2, but it gives like 200 damage, and like you can't get like more damage from it with like more damage, but I mean same as this finger as well. Like, it can get some fairly good damage too. I'm going to throw this basically up there. It's basically the best of the attack talents, this one right here, by the way. That's just what I'll say about it. Alright, I'm wasting time here, sort of like thinking about it. Let's just go like, keep on here a little bit. So there's Jinx, page 2. So I'll note that Jinx is basically none of these like talents that basically cost like 2 like, willpower to basically use. And essentially how Jinx basically works, when you defeat an enemy, you gain a stack of dread. And when you basically use Jinx, it'll basically deal 100 damage plus 50 times dread. And I think you can basically have like 5 or 10 stacks of dread depending on like how much like attributes basically built into this. They go to like these things right here. there's like, should be like, you know, something here that lets you get like extra stacks. Or not. I guess you can only have like, you know, 5 or is it like 10, I guess, of like, you know, Jinx. Blah, blah. Well, anyways, this is sort of explain Jinx a little bit. Basically, how Jinx works is it lets you stockpile damage from like killing enemies, and that can be very useful for like, you know, build up a very powerful attack. If you basically like you build like magic damage and build like, you know, Jinx basically over the long run with like, say like, you know, Dread Harvest, you can get like some like, you know, really insane stuff. And if you basically have skills that like, you know, let basically boost like, you know, quickly each turn, stuff like Green Vortex and like, you know, Buick should be very useful too. Going over the stuff here, Grim Vortex basically is useful for like pulling enemies basically towards you. If you're basically like you're not playing like a Clairvoyant, or if they basically want to like, you know, just pull stuff towards you, it can be very useful to like, you know, use like Grim Vortex basically to like, you know, basically get like a lot of tactical like, you know, control over the battlefield. Plus it gives you like 2 stacks of Dread, which is very useful for like, you know, building up like lots. Oh, there we go. Dread, you can only build up a max of 10 stacks. So there's that basically the thing about it. But Grim Vortex lets you build like, you know, your Dread faster, basically like, you know, use it more, you know, more effectively over the long run. Bewitch basically lets you start combat with 2 stacks of Dread, and like, you know, that can be very useful from like the start, I guess we'll say. Plus you get a lot of damage basically from like Blimp the Dread basically in a battle, so the regular Jinx just gives you 100 plus 50. This gives you 150 plus 50, and like this lets you build up your Dread a little faster. This gives you 100 plus 150, but basically get like, you know, massive Dread basically with it. Well, you don't really get massive Dreads with it, but if you basically kill a lot of it, then like, you know, you get like massive damage basically out of Bewitch. And then Dread Harvest here, basically like, you know, I really like Dread Harvest by the way, because this actually is one of the things that persists between combats. So if you basically like, you know, get Dread Harvest early on, and you basically build up like your 10 like stacks of Dread, you're basically guaranteed to basically have an ability that does like, you know, 800 damage from the get-go to start like your turn, like your turn of combat. So yeah, there's some fairly powerful things about like, you know, Jinx here. Now there is some drawbacks to Jinx as well. The first being the fact that this does cost like, you know, 2 right here to basically use. You can reduce the cost of it, which is like, you know, definitely needed. And you can boost this damage to be like, you know, even worse with like, you know, Dreadful Jinx and like, you know, Lethal Jinx. How you build it really depends, like, you know, what you're basically sort of aiming for, I guess, with it, I guess we'll say. There's Dread Jinx, this lets you like build up like, you know, 3 stacks of Dread the first turn of combat. Preserving lets you gain 3 stacks of Dread after using Jinx, so this lets you like use it more basically within combat. Critical chance, you know, nice base cooldown. 5 more damage per stack of Dread. Potent Jinx lets you get more damage out of it. So, you know, 100 versus 200. 100 versus like, you know, 35. This is definitely a very powerful ability, but I will note there is one like sort of drawback with it, is the fact like, you know, until like you basically like, you know, really pour some time basically into it, it's a little bit weak basically early on to sort of like, you know, really consider. This is definitely like just sort of like, you know, a slow starting like, you know, binding that basically pick up, but you know, you have to basically really build into it in order to really get good with it. So it's definitely laudable. You know what? I'm going to put Invocation up to Excellent because the thing about Invocation is that it really does feel like an excellent sort of ability. So you know what? We're going to throw basically up to Excellent because why not? But yeah, the thing about like, you know, Jinx here, I consider this to be a very laudable talent because early on it's very weak, but like very strong. Like it becomes very strong like, yeah, as like sort of progressively like invest in it. So starts weak, gets strong. That's what I can always say about Jinx. All right. Lightning Bolt. That's like my friend's favorite, like, you know, binded basically draft, I think. So Lightning Bolt is basically like, you know, this augment that like, you know, hits a single target enemy for like, you know, 1 stack of shocked. When you basically like use this basically to like, you know, and it's like upgrade forms, you can get Zap, which basically does like, you know, 250 damage and inflicts 2 stacks of shock. and enemies in a large area around the target take like, extra damage. You got Lightning Storm, basically deal 150 damage to all enemies and basically inflict 1 stack of shock to 2 random enemies. So very useful, basically hitting like a bunch of enemies all at once. You don't really care who you hit. Chain Lightning lets you damage a single enemy, inflict 1 stack of shock, and damage and shock spreads to 2 nearby enemies. So kind of similar to Zap here, but basically like you basically zap like one enemy, basically spread the shock to like more. So again, it's sort of like Lightning Storm, basically like you don't really care who you hit, but it's just in between like Lightning Storm and like Zap here. So nice little bit of variation. What makes Lightning Bolt really good is that basically when you're basically like capable of inflicting like a really powerful attack, like say Jinx, you basically hit like something like Lightning Bolt and then hit like a Jinx basically on it, or like some other like high damage attack. You basically do like damage to like everything on the field all at once, and it can basically like rip apart like weaker enemies and like damage like heavy like heavier ones with like a powerful enough attack. You can also be very dangerous with like certain situations, like say like against Janice though, so there's that to keep in mind, but whatever. So base cooldown on critically inflict an additional stack of shock, so if you're able to crit, then more shock. Empowered Lightning basically get like 50 automated damage for the rest of the turn, so very useful based on sort of build up for like powerful turn, I guess. Charged Lightning basically inflicted an additional stack of shock, so more shocked, more damage. Inflict like Hex, that's basically like useful for like Lightning Storm, but not really much for like a single target ability. Smite on hit is like useful if you're basically like having invocation, I guess, but or like lots of smite, I guess. There's critical, and there's like discount. Again, it's got a long cooldown, so unless you have like something that basically lets you reset this a lot, it's like not as useful. I definitely like Lightning Bolt for like being like a sort of like single power like strike on a single enemy, and it can like sort of like just like wipe out the rest of the enemies that's around it. So I really appreciate what basically it's like used for. It's not like say like Ascending or like Cleave, but basically like sort of rely on like a damage like buffs like after a turn basically ends. But the thing about it is like you basically use it like prior to like turn ending to basically like you really get use for it. So it's not really fantastic. It's laudable. The only weakness I basically see about this is the fact that like if you basically have like enough damage output anyways, then you don't really care about like little itty bitty stuff. Or if you have lots of shield, you probably don't care about it either. All right, Pilfer. So page 4 of augments. Now I probably never really used like Pilfer as much as I really should have, because Pilfer is basically like very cheap ability to sort of like get yourself a lot of coolings from enemies, and that can be very useful for like purchasing like vestiges and stuff. So essentially, like, you pick up like a Pilfer, and you can use this to sort of like rob enemies of like money to sort of buy vestiges. So you can focus on that as opposed to like as I usually do in my games, sacrificing vestiges and stuff like that over and over again. There's Plunder, basically lets you get a random consumable that can be useful if like going for like potion type build. There's Heist. The first enemy you steal from will drop a random vestige. Stealing from Guardians deals higher rarity vestiges, so if you want to basically get like vestiges, then that's like a really great way of doing it. There's Mug. Basically you like steal like damage you basically damage the enemy and like steal coolings from them. And if you steal even more coolings, you basically defeat the enemy. So when you're basically about to kill them, and you get like even more coolings of it. I don't really care much about like Mug, but you got like Heist, you got like Plunder. They can be very useful for like different sort of like strat space you can basically run with like the this ability. So you have Absorbing Pilfer, basically you can steal an HP, so sort of like a healing ability if you want to make it that way. You got Pickpocket Pilfer, so you gain a little movement. Quicken for like less base cooldown. It's already very cheap, so that's actually very useful if you want to use it over and over. You got Greedy Pilfer. Increase the range, can pilfer from multiple enemies at once, but will cost is reduced by 1. Greedy Pilfer is actually really useful, by the way, because if it's multiple enemies and you have like say like Heist or like Plunder, you basically can steal like potions from all those enemies, and with heist you basically steal like multiple vestiges from enemies as well. So you can like make yourself really really powerful if like you're really lucky about it. You got prepare pilfer, very standard, full cost discount. If you get greedy pilfer, that's really good for us, like very good for use. Market inflicts marks, so you got like your tactical stuff. Orb basically steals an orb. That's just like stupidly powerful, obviously, so useful. Lucky pilfer's chance to steal a random vestige, so why not? Let's just steal like more vestiges. Large box basically means steal additional coolings. Now the only problem like I have with pilfer is the fact that it's not really like a damaging sort of ability. It's sort of like a tactical ability, and it doesn't really like boost up like your your prospects in a single fight. It basically boosts up your prospects over like a lot of fights. It's definitely very useful, but I mean, it's not like the best thing like ever. I'd rather like use like say like blink or like invigorate over it, but it's still powerful enough that I basically like wouldn't like downgrade it either. So there's that too. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna say it is S tier because the fact that you can actually steal an orb, this means like you can sort of like pay for itself. And if I have like there's like reasons basically like pilfer. Like if you have the time to sort of like take to sort of like benefit from it. Now we're gonna throw it back down here. I'll rebalance these as I go along, but it's useful. That's all I can say about pilfer. All right, poison vapors over here in like 406. Now, I've won many a game of poison vapor, especially on like say like classes that really like support it, like the Chainbreaker or like the Moss Cloak. The idea of poison vapor is that it doesn't do a whole lot of damage, but it basically inflicts a lot of poison, and poison basically like can really do a lot of damage to enemies. So basically like really geared toward it. You got putrefy, basically lets you like inflict like damage in a small area, as opposed to like all around you. But basically, if an enemy already has a stack of poison, you basically trigger the poison. So you basically get like damage off, much like the incinerate. There's poison dart. This basically turns into a single target ability. It deals like even less like same amount of damage there, but the thing about it, it basically inflicts like it basically doubles the stacks of poison. So that's like where it can really like shine. And then Toxify basically inflicts toxic. So on defeat, inflicts half stacks of poison to nearby enemies. So it's just like wildfire, so to speak. It's a good ability compared to say like Incendiary. So it's definitely like laudable like just from the get-go, but there's more to it than that. So you have potent vapor for like additional stacks of poison, quicken vapor for like base cooldown, widespread for like widespread. Now what widespread really like affects this thing is the fact that like you have single target abilities. So basically like the ability to sort of like say you use like poison dart like everything, for example. If you use it basically like on everything around you, basically inflict a double poison on everything, so to speak, which is like stupidly powerful. And like even putrefy can be pretty powerful, like basically like, doing a lot of damage basically to get-go, so to speak, from it. So there's that too. We got noxious vapor, more damage from itself. Prepare vapor, you get like a full full cost discount. I mean, I don't really care much for like cost discounts when it's like such a high cooldown, but there's ways around it. Critical vapor, you basically inflict 10 stacks of poison, and then critically you deal like additional stacks. Mighty vapor, you basically inflict 50 stacks of poison. Putrid poison, like poison damage. Debilitating poison, you deal 25 damage to enemies inflicted with poison. So you just deal more damage. That's all it basically does. So unlike with like the other abilities, this is like super powerful to say the least. And I basically rank it basically at least the same like rank as like Cone of Frost here, for example. So it's not bad. All right, what's the next one? I should check. So quicken. All right, now we got ourselves one that I think is a little bit weaker. So you get to see one of the lower rated like ones here. So quicken. Quicken reduces your utter cooldowns by 1 and gains your 50 free movement. When you basically needed a talent to sort of like let you move around, like from like different areas of the battlefield, because like say high gravity or something like that, this is what you basically get. The ability to reduce your like utter cooldowns by 1 is neat though, by the way, so I won't like discount it, but it's like I'll show like the bindings basically why I like think it's a little bit weak. But anyways, accelerate, reduce your other cooldowns by 1, gain a little movement for the rest of the turn. This is of course stupidly powerful because like, you know, it lets you just basically go wherever you want to at this point. Let me basically get this like ability here. Expedite, reduce the cooldown of another random binding to 0, gain free movement, so as opposed to reducing the cooldown of 1 by like, you know, everything by 1, you basically reduce something on this to 0. That can be very useful if you're basically like, you know, going for like a solid like, you know, poison type of build, for example, or, you know, other bindings for like high like cooldowns. To like sort of like say like talk about like, you know, poison up here by the way. If say you play like you know a moss cloak and you have like, you know, quicken and like, you know, poison vapor, you can basically use like poison cloud, and if you have like nothing else in cooldown, you can use like, you know, expedite to basically turn this basically back into like, you know, available talent. And it's got like, as you can see, like, you know, 0 cost, right? So you basically can just use this again for free, so to speak, if you have this ability. So in some situations, it can be very powerful. Basically, if you have like, you know, expedite here. And there's hasten, reduce your other cooldowns to 0. So I mean, if you don't need like movement at all, then like, you know, that's where like, you know, haste is very useful, I guess, for obvious reasons. All right, so I'm not don't really fit much of quicken. Its ascensions are pretty useful, but when you look at its augments, it's a little bit like less so the case that's like useful, because you basically have swift and quicken, so more movement. I mean, you might need more movement, but you know, you already got movement from the skill itself, so do you really need more? Is the thing. Invigorating quicken, gain free automatic damage until a binding is used. That's only for a single binding, so unless you like have like, you know, one strike you really want to make use of, it's not that great. Vigorous quicken, you basically get 2 stacks of vigor. That's always useful, so at least I'll be, you know, granted that. Quicken is like, you know, quicken, just, you know, this already has like a 7 like, you know, turn cooldown, and those some of the ascensions basically for it are like a little bit faster, like, you know, expedite's got like a free, and that's like a 9. By nature it's like 7, so it does have like a bit of a cooldown basically on to, you know, basically consider. Now, where this basically becomes weak is the fact that it's got magic quicken and physical quicken. And as you can basically see from these two abilities here, they reduce the cooldowns of your magic binds by 1 or your physical binds by 1. Now, if you're playing like a character that basically has like this solid all physical binds, this can be very useful. But if it's basically like say something like, you know, the clairvoyant basically has like, you know, a mix of physical and like, you know, magical, or other characters like that, is not that great. And basically, if like you get like say magic quicken, you know, have like, you know, no physical, then like, you know, you basically have like only 2 options basically to start pick them from, where you basically like, you know, collect your stuff. Enhanced quicken, reduce your highest cooldown to 0. Useful if you basically start building for that. Smiting quicken, smite all enemies, that's always useful. Blurring quicken, you get like blur. The thing I found quicken is that like, you know, it has some nice stuff on it, but you know, once you get to like the later game, I find like these like other one like on up here a little bit weaker, so to speak. And it makes me like, you know, not really like it as much. I wouldn't say it's like deficient like this one here, but you know, it's basically just one of these things that's mediocre, to say the least. And it's not much more basically saying that, I guess we'll say. Alright, shield wall. On page 3. Now, I used to always think that shield wall is basically this really stupidly powerful talent, because it basically gave you shield, which basically negated attacks on you. And it gave you spike to boost. But in my like gameplay, I've actually found that this is actually sort of like a weaker skill. It does have some like, you know, a lot of benefits, not to say the least, by the way. But I always find there's like other stuff everybody like, you know, picking up than like shield wall, because you know, in this game I find offense is usually better than defense for a lot of things, and its ascensions are like kind of terrible. You got like, you know, palisade wall. This gets you spiked, and I really don't care about being hit for that, you know, for the most part. So unless you're being hit, this isn't that useful. You got force field. This consumes all your remaining will. So unless you have like, you know, purpose for your will, you may not want to be using this. And then there's fortify, which gains you like, you know, 5 shield, 10 stacks of spike, and resistant. I do like fortify a lot, by the way. I like resistant, you know, to be sure. So I like this ascension, but these other two are just like, you know, they're there, I guess we'll say. I mean, force field, I like, you know, gain shield, but you know, I may not want to spend all that will basically get it, is a thing. I mean, when you want the shield, you want it, but you know, eh. Play wall gives you more shield. You know, if you're building for shield, this is obviously useful. Quicken wall, base cooldown. Stockpile wall. Stockpile wall is basically one of those things that, like, you know, I could see it being purposely needed if you need, like, to push yourself, like, you know, sometimes, but it's just sort of like met to me at some other avenues as well. Spike wall, if you're building for a spike, you know, there's spike. Restore wall, you get some HP. Not bad, you know, you can't complain about getting restoration from anything. Thicken wall basically gains shield for every damage resist you have. If you're building damage resist, is going to be very useful, but I mean, I find like it's very hard to sort of build, like, you know, account for damage resist, so it's like, you know, kind of hard to like really like make use of this one. Fortifying wall and losing HP reduce the cooldown of shield block by 1, so obviously if you're like, you know, taking hits and like, you know, you want to use this more. Impenetrable wall, base more shield. Fortified wall, again, consume your remaining movement, gain 1 shield for every 10 movement base consumed. A combination of force skills can be like make you like a brick, but I mean, it's one of these things where, like, you know, I don't like the fact that it just sort of restricts, like, you know, when you can basically use it as a result. Like, I see what they're basically going for, but the thing about, like, you know, shield wall is that, like, you know, it has its drawbacks that like really hurt it quite a bit, I find. So it makes me not want to use it. Though I will note that like shield is like pretty powerful, so it's probably on par of like say quicken here in some aspects. So there is at least going for it. You know what I'm going to actually do? I'm going to throw this basically on terrible because I really don't like discharge that much. And if we're going to throw like quicken basically down here. And maybe like incinerate down here too. I'll basically like reorganize this a little bit more, but you know, that's what we're basically gonna start doing. We're just, you know, start moving stuff basically down because we got a lot of stuff basically up here. There's a lot of good towns by the way in this game. I mean, they're not like all like, you know, the same rank. Like, you know, I'm looking at Cleave by the way, and like, you know, Cleave is probably like laudable, but you know, well, it's probably on equivalent of like, you know, Jinx and like lightning, like, you know, lightning bolt for example. We'll get that in a moment. Let's just get to smoke bomb restoration out of the way first. All right, so smoke bomb, that should be at the end. Yeah, right there. And then we got restoration, which is like, you know, page 3. All right, so I'm a big fan of smoke bomb. I like the fact that you basically daze like, you know, enemies in a large radius, and there's actually like ability to actually make a hit like everything on the you know the screen as well. So there's that too. Cluster bomb basically lets you like do like, you know, hard damage in moderate area, and if you basically defeat enemies, you basically deal like more damage as a result. You got hit and miss, basically lets you deal like, you know, mark to everything as well as give precise to allies. Can't really complain about that. Smoke screen basically gives you resistant and blur, which is of course really super useful. So very like, you know, tactically basically use this for basically you can like go for like, you know, more damage, more defense, more damage, like, you know, just killing power, so to speak. Now, where like this really shines by was the fact that like, you know, you get like, you know, not this stuff here, like, you know, potent is basically just more damage for itself, basic cooldown. A little bit bleed damage is like usually basically availability for cleave, I guess we'll say. But you can basically get like hex and shatter basically like in all enemies basically hit by this. Smoke bomb has a very big radius by the way, so the ability to sort of like this shatter and like hex everything all at once basically means like, you know, you basically do like, you know, massive damage, like, you know, drop this on first and like go with everything else after, so to speak. So it can be very powerful. Prepare smoke bomb, basically lets you like, you know, make it like cheap to use. Critical smoke bomb, critical is critical. Devastating is doing more damage. And there we go, widespread smoke bomb targets all enemies. Now I will note that I feel like widespread is a little bit weak to sort of like, you know, pick up later on in the game because usually like there's like less enemies to fight, like, you know, the further on you go, but you know, it's still useful if you're basically trying to hit everything. So this like what's really useful about this if you need a tank, for example, and like there's like a few enemies based out of radius are like targeting someone else. So it's good. Smoke bomb I really feel is basically one of these things that like, you know, it's basically up here with like, you know, the excellence rating. So that's probably basically for now. I'm going to adjust this as we go along. All right, restoration. Now, it should come as no surprise that this is probably one of the more powerful abilities to base in this game. Restoration basically restores HP to yourself or an ally. And it basically has essentially that lets you get regeneration, so you basically turn start, you regenerate. In a long fight, that's basically gonna be very powerful, especially against say the Unbound, where you may not want to be casting this basically in the blight. You have quick bend. I think this is kind of useless, this one, because it basically lets you cast it more, but I mean, I'd rather basically say get greater restoration, which basically this heals for so much more. And regeneration is not bad if you basically have it basically going on each turn, so to speak, as well. But yeah, greater restoration is definitely very powerful for sure. That probably should have been nerfed a little bit, just to throw it out there. So, restoration, restore 2 additional HP at increased cooldown cost of 1. I mean, I don't really like the fact that basically make this longer basically used, but I mean, additional HP is it's a good trade-off. Shielding basically against your shield, not bad. Quicken, standard. Prepared, standard. Mending, if your recipient has less than 50% max HP, restore additional free HP. So, when they're injured, definitely want to heal them up. So, super useful. Then they're sturdy. Basically, if you overheal them, they basically get shield instead. Honestly, this is really very good basically later on. So I used to discount this as being kind of useless because why am I basically shielding my ally past that point? But it can be very useful for sure, especially on tanks. Resistance grants you resistant. Amplify basically gets you more HP. Nurturing basically gives you max HP. That's just stupidly powerful. Restoration is definitely one of those abilities that it's basically top tier, so to speak. So I'm happy with throwing it up here. Now, let's just go through those abilities right here and sort of moving them down a little bit and around, I guess. Let's see here, Aftershock. I definitely feel like Aftershock is probably up a little bit too high, by the way, so it probably should move down well, I find Aftershock was probably more useful than this stuff down here though, so I'm basically probably fine where it is based right now. These all look like they're where it should be. I might move Pilfer down, by the way, just because, it is useful in order to get, that, extra orb, but, I mean, you actually have to get it. And, well, you get those coolings as well, by the way. But you sacrifice, other stuff basically for it. I forgot that I'll move, Pilfer down there, I guess. I know, by the way, Poison Vapor and Cone of Frost, they aren't necessarily best for everyone basically in the game. So I might go this, for example. Move the attack towns basically down a little bit because they do have their weaknesses for them. And maybe move Jinx basically down here. The thing about Jinx is that it can be powerful, but you have to sort of get it up the power in order to basically use it. So there's that against it. And I might move Cultivate down as well because it's useful too, but I mean, I'd rather be doing something else rather than using it. Move this this here a little bit. That's basically sort of coming to be sort of a tier list basically I can basically sort of get behind. All this talent's basically where it's really at. Blink, Invigorate, and Restoration is definitely top tier because there's benefit to they benefit everyone equally as what they basically do. Grasp, Smoke Bomb, not so much this. This could probably basically be laudable. Yeah, I think I can get behind that. Basically, Smoke Bomb and Grasp, they're very tactical in their use, so, I get behind them. Invocation, if you build, for Smite, they can be very useful. Pilfer. See, the thing is, pilfering money, it doesn't really help you in the combat, that's the thing, that's the only problem with it, but, it helps you with, we can basically buy with it, so it can be very good. you know, that's basically good enough where it is. I'm not going to basically complain about like what I basically got here. So that's basically a tier list of basically how I basically view the different bindings basically in the game. Clearly, as you can see, like, you know, anything that basically like benefits like your character basically directly, like, you know, itself, I definitely like value very highly. Tactical abilities, like, you know, I consider them fairly excellent. You know, these like abilities on here are pretty good. The attack abilities, these ones are a little bit more deficient because they have like issues with them. Do I want Jinx to be this low? Like, Jinx isn't like, you know, mediocre in like in the long run. I mean, it's got like a penalty basically to it, but yeah, it costs 2 though is the thing, right? So let's put it down here. All right, well, that's basically my tier list for like, you know, the different bindings in the game. I'll come back with like one for the trinkets, but you know, if I was supposed to rank like all like the bindings basically in the game to pick up, that's how I rank them. Hope you guys basically enjoyed the tier list, and you know, take care.